I think if people just opened up their eyes a little bit and followed best practices in the industry, but just had a little bit more fun with it and a little bit more creativity, I don't know that that would generate more downloads or more leads or more brand awareness, but at least there's an element of fun to the project.
Welcome to the Marketing Leadership Podcast, brought to you by Listen Network. Join your host, Dots Oyebolu, as he learns from CMOs, agency leaders, and business leaders about the state of performance marketing, plus insights on strategies, campaigns, and intelligence for commercial impact. Connect the dots and enjoy the latest episode.
Hi, marketers. This is Dots, and welcome to the Marketing Leadership Podcast. With me here is Eric Montgomery, founder at the Podcast Haven. We will discuss the benefits of using branded podcast for brand growth. I know you guys are ready, so let's get it. Eric, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope I didn't murder your surname there. It's gotten better over the past 5 years. Well, yeah, it's really, really nice to have you. And for those who don't know you, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and how you've done so well?
Yeah. So currently I am the founder of the Podcast Haven. I started the company officially in 2018 when it became a legitimate company, but had been working in podcasting since maybe like 2015. So it's been in the space a while, but how I even got there, I'll try to keep this short, was grew up in Los Angeles and always was a musician my whole life, playing guitar, playing in bands. And that kind of led me to wanting to record myself playing music, playing my guitar, recording friends. And so it's about 2008, I want to say, when started to teach myself how to record. I started initially on a Mac with GarageBand, and slowly, the dream was to be like get a Grammy and like record bands, in professional recording studios and mix albums and go on to like rock and roll like Hall of Fame. But I did get a little bit of taste of that. I started out with friends. Eventually, after college, had a few internships at recording studios here in Los Angeles. And it's tough to make it in music. As obviously as an artist, but also on like being a recording engineer.
Wow.
Had a little bit of taste of that. Got to work with some like maybe C level or B level artists. But slowly realized that I'm in Los Angeles and all my friends were working in TV and film. And so I saw how much money they were making, and it was a lot more than me. And slowly I started thinking, all right, I'm going to take my audio skills and try to get into TV and film. Long story short, eventually got a job at a voiceover studio where I would record voiceover artists. Recording voiceover for commercials, for radio, got the chance to work with some people at like Nickelodeon, CNN, Comedy Central, and I would record them, I'm not the talent, but on the other side of the glass as the audio engineer. And while I was doing that, funny enough, I got an internship on a podcast. I started discovering podcasts. I mean, I knew they were a thing, but this was maybe like 2014, twenty
Wow.
fifteen. Got an internship on a podcast, kind of saw the opportunity in that. Joined Upwork, the freelancing site. It was called something different back then. I think it was called Elancer.
I joined 2016, so I can't, but it was Upwork at that time.
It was Upwork. Okay, this must have been like 2 years before that or 18 months, but, started seeing, like, the potential in podcasting and started applying for gigs on Upwork. Got
Wow.
one gig who I'm still working with today. She has a big show,
Wow.
but editing and mixing her show. got a couple other side gigs. Eventually, I was like, okay, this podcast thing is legit. I started cold emailing people. I'd go to Apple Podcasts, I'd look at their contact information, and I'd email them, hey, do you need an audio engineer for your podcast? I can edit and mix your podcast. Probably sent about 300 or 200 cold emails and got one or two clients. So I was starting to get paid work with podcasting. I was also working at the voiceover studio. And then I decided to get a website and kind of go all in on podcasting. And it's just kind of grown since then. I've had several iterations of the website, and slowly just decided like I was making some money and I was like, all right, I'm going to make this a real company. I'm going to produce, edit, mix podcasts. And I've been fortunate kinda a little bit early, but also, like, right time, right you know, the timing was right, so that was kinda lucky in that sense, and it just kinda grew from there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go in all motivational speaking here, but at the time when you started, like, what was that like? What were your friends, your family telling you? Are you crazy? Because I've walked a lot of crazy roads in my life since, since the past 30 plus years. Like crazy, crazy, crazy all over again. I can't just get a break. So now that, people listen to podcasts, over almost 1.5 hours a day, the average American adult, um, would you have seen this kind of future at that time? Or you're just like, well, I'm not making it in music. Let's see if this is my, I don't know, insurance.
It's interesting that you say that because I was still working at the voiceover studio and I started very, very part-time in podcasting, it happened so slowly and organically that nobody thought I was crazy because I wasn't, like, taking out a big loan from the bank and being
Yeah,
like, "I'm
okay.
gonna launch this company." It happened so
Yeah.
organically, um, that I think and since I had the money from the voiceover work, I
Mhm.
think that it just, it didn't feel, like, scary or didn't feel like I was taking a big leap because of how slow it was. But to answer your question, I mean, I never thought it would really get this big. Um, I yeah, it and a little bit of luck with the timing and podcasting been around for a long time, but I wanna
Mhm.
say, 2016, 17, 18, and then into the pandemic, it really started to blow up, and
Yeah.
so I was, to be perfectly honest, a little bit lucky with the timing, but I was able to just DIY the whole thing, never had to take out, like, a big loan or anything like that, and so that definitely worked to my advantage. Now, I don't think people think I'm crazy now. My parents, I don't even they kinda know what podcasting is, kind of, um, but, I think it's here to stay, and feel very fortunate the way that it happened.
I mean, some people compare a podcast to a blog, for example, 5 million podcasts to 1 billion blogs, but the engagement is a little bit different. So there's way better engagement and more, I would argue, 10 to 1 on podcasting compared to a blog. So, it's sometimes almost feels like, are there podcasts everywhere? But I don't think so. I think there's still more ground to cover. And, again, now it's more of podcast created this attention bucket for users, customers, and so on. And it's beginning to fill up, right? So, how many podcasts do I listen to for 1.5 hours a day or 1.2 hours a day, according to eMarketer? How do you help your brands to reach their audience, and cut through the noise so that, you get that content market fit, as I would call it?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think I take a little bit different approach to that because when I get on like a discovery call with somebody and I think a lot of not everybody, but a lot of people in their mind they think that the podcast is gonna get millions of downloads and be this like massive thing that a lot of people listen to and the days of that are kind of over. It's a lot more difficult now. I mean, 10 years ago, you can make a podcast and there were so few of them out there that you would get a lot of downloads quickly. But, I try to when I talk to clients and just people in general in the industry, I try to steer them away from thinking that it needs to be this massive show with, hundred thousands of downloads. I try to focus on, okay, like what the w really, like, hone in on your niche and try to find your, like, ideal listener, your ideal client, um, because I think, like, 500 dedicated listeners is a lot more powerful than, that are really in that niche than 100,000 really broad, listeners. So I try to explain to them that, your podcast likely isn't gonna get that big, but let's look at the audience that you have and let's talk to them specifically. The whole conversation around like your ideal listener, it's a little bit exhausting because everybody talks about it, but it's kind of true, you know?
Yeah.
You really, I think, with your messaging, want to talk to a specific group. And I think when you start connecting with that group, you're gonna get you're gonna you're not gonna see the huge numbers that maybe you thought you would have, but I
Mm.
think, you're gonna get feedback and you're gonna build community around whatever it is, your product or your service, and I think long term, that's a little bit more valuable to build that community, to build those relationships with exactly it is, that you do or that you talk about.
Yeah, I agree with you.
But we all want
w-
a massive podcast, don't get me wrong. If you wanna give me 1,000,000 downloads and I start making a ton of money from ad sales, like, hey, I'm into it.
yeah, you're right. Like, I mean, for me, like with this podcast, for example, we started out looking at marketing leaders on, I don't want to use the word agency side, on the consulting side, that deal with brand strategy, performance strategy, D2C, B2B. Of course, that makes that a bit broad, but there was a bit of a niche in there. I wasn't sure I was going to get an Eric on the podcast. I thought I was just going to interview my friends over, maybe he knows a thing or two about marketing in general. And now even the podcast is starting to evolve from what was a marketing specific podcast to a content podcast marketing type podcast. And so we're going, depending on when this comes out, there will be a lot of rebranding or shift uh, uh going forward. But you're right. If they are dedicated, if they are giving you those, in our end we call it the 50% benchmark consumption rate, that the one that Apple gives people, or if they are giving you that, multiple episodes listen per podcast, then you know that you've got a select loyal audience, that will that are more fans than just audiences, or more fans than just users, and then you could really shape your brand around that and hopefully overwhelm them, which makes a lot of sense there. But yeah, another thing I was thinking about is branding. You know, branded podcasts should be branded, brand identity. How does that work? And we are not here to discuss. You need to get a logo. You need to get your font.
Yeah.
That topic has been around since before any of us in the on this recording were born. So, what are some of those aspects of the brand that you often consider is starting a podcast and rebranding a podcast, so that it's better positioned to the audiences intended?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to, like, branding and specifically with your podcast, I would say that I don't know that I'm necessarily trying to create something new with clients, but in a perfect world, the people that I'm working with or people doing branded podcasts in general, hopefully the company already kinda has an identity, and then that makes it a little bit easier, but I think when we talk about branding, we need to talk about, like, company culture.
Okay.
What's your current company culture, and how can we kind of unveil that through the podcast? I mean, what is it that you guys stand for, internally as a company, and externally, what is, like, the tone and the vibe that you project across, all forms of digital media? How do you like to be perceived? Is there a cause or a charity that you partner with? It's just kind of like getting, um the podcast to unpack some of that so that, the people that you are talking to can kinda understand more about, like, who you are, and they might wanna work with you or just getting more awareness. A lot of the branded podcasts, honestly, I mean, some of it's kinda like lead generation on the side on, like, the DL, but it's also just, like, brand awareness, and how do you want how do you want the company to show up in the world, but also your host or the people that are producing the podcast or a part of the podcast, and it's not easy to do. I think it can be tricky, um but it's kinda just talking about your products and services and your people and maybe highlighting people on the team and kind of how your leadership works and, how when you work with clients, what that process is like and hopefully it is, like, people oriented and trying to, get that to come across, and it is a challenge. It really is, and sometimes it takes, like whether it's 1 season or whether it's an on let's say it's an ongoing podcast, it's not seasonal, sometimes it can take a while to kind of, figure that out and, it evolves over time, and as your company evolves, hopefully the podcast is evolving as well. But it's challenging, don't get me wrong, it's not the easiest thing to do correctly, because sometimes these branded podcasts will just have, like, a CEO or someone high up in the company and it seems so stale sometimes. I think, honestly, choosing the right people to host or co-host, or some of them do rotating host, choosing the right people, within the company to fill those roles, I think that's important too, because you can be talking about all this stuff about company culture and your mission, but then if you have someone who can't really, like doesn't have the personality to, like, project that, on the mic, it it sometimes it feels like it's a mismatch, so there's a lot of things really, but, the company culture piece is big to me.
Interesting. Would you would you brand a podcast around the host? What do I mean by that? Apple Podcast by Dots, and then Dots gets an offer from Alphabet, and then we need to rebrand it again. What do you think about people branding podcast around the host?
Um, I don't think anyone's ever asked me that,
Yeah,
but,
that's what we do here.
yeah. Well, I would say that it's weird because I've worked with, several companies or at least had discovery calls where, like, they don't know who should host it within the company, and I think, if you do build it around the host, that's a good question. What if they leave? What if they switch roles? Or something happens and then now you've gotta get someone else in, and then the listeners are confused, and who's this, and why is this changing?
Mm,
Um, so I don't know if you wanna do that. I think
mm.
sometimes people like the companies and the branded podcasts like the idea of a rotating host or at least rotating co-hosts. Um, and I gotta say, I don't know if I have a hard stance on that because I think as listeners in general, for all types of podcasts, we do get very emotionally connected to the host, and we expect to hear
Yeah.
them in our headphones, and we
Yeah.
start to feel like we know them. But then if they do leave, that could ruin the podcast, and people aren't as connected as like a new host. So it's interesting. I think to some extent you have to kind of brand it around the host because that kind of helps create the identity of
Personal.
the show. But
Yeah.
when you're dealing with like these larger companies, I don't know if they need to have the show around a host because it's more about the company than it is about one person.
And they've gotten a brand identity, a brand equity already. Those big companies.
Yeah. So, that's a good question. I think that's a challenge. I think I think it would just take some brainstorming about how you wanna go about that. I could see, pros and cons to both, but I could
Mm,
also see challenges, especially if
mm.
the host leaves or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's something that has happened to us with some clients, and we tend to ask. And something else that might be bugging me is: have you seen companies use podcasts in very special ways? So you've talked about brand awareness, maybe demand generation, lead generation, ABM, not the scope of this episode, but have you seen people use podcasting as a very special purpose initiative? So, for example, I've seen people use podcasting to drive some sort of an advocacy. We want our guests to be our customers. We've seen people who drive podcasts from a hiring perspective, which is a little crazy, whereby we want to hire for this role the best people in the world, and we're going to interview those who already work with us and share their journey working with us as that position.
Mm.
There are, you could go on and on, mini series, blah blah blah. What are some of the craziest type of podcasting goals that you have seen companies most especially do? So I'm not talking about a dots podcast where I want to earn ad revenue on Spotify.
Yeah. So I think interviewing customers, I definitely worked on a show that does that. I think if you do that tastefully, you can pull it off, and it's not like selly, but you're just getting their feedback.
Mm,
Um, the craziest thing, let's see. I don't know that I've had anything crazy per se. Definitely had the customer thing. Definitely, I work with a law firm, and the
yeah,
law firm practices all types of law.
yeah,
Um, and they've taken the angle of, like, it's not just one show for the law firm.
mm,
It's it's um it's the labor law group, it's the patent law group. And they've done shows for each division of the law firm. And in
mm,
that case, they are trying to position their lawyers who are hosts kind
yeah,
of as experts in their field, to and it is kind of a form of lead generation, but it's also a way to get their lawyers out and get more awareness. But crazy, I don't know, on the business side, because I feel like businesses and brands are usually very hesitant to do anything outside of the norm. So even if you had a really cool or crazy, and I love that. If there was a crazy idea, I might be a little hesitant too at first, but I'm kinda all for, like, experimenting, and it's not like I know everything. If the brand
yeah,
has a cool idea and maybe we haven't seen a lot of that in the marketplace
yeah,
and they wanna try that, I love that, because I think that in essence, I think podcasting should be like that. I think people should try new things and new ways to connect with people, and something that might seem outrageous, but who knows? They could be a trendsetter.
mm,
So I do like the idea of doing something against the norm, but I
yeah,
I think brands can be a little hesitant, because of their reputation, and, but if someone's got something, I say roll with it. I think that's cool.
I think that corporates also try to, you're right about the hesitation and all that, and that's why I've struggled to get big time CMOs on this podcast, even though I've gotten
Yeah,
folks
yeah.
like Neil Patel by
I listened to that
gracefully.
episode. Yeah, it was a great episode.
So but I think some of the things I've also seen is at the episode level. So people try to get creative on the episode level. I've seen a company do a 1 minute skit as the episode starts, and I was like, "Well, this is good. It will have taken a lot to pull off." So
I like that. I like
ep-
that. I think that's
go
cool. No, I think that's cool. I think trying stuff like that, I think one thing that's at least passionate to me, because I come from a music background, is the
Mm,
way that some of these branded podcasts could use music to kind of paint a visual picture, or like, just solidify like brand identity. I think a lot of times, and I know budgeting is a factor and
mm,
cost, but I think,
mm,
licensing music, and kind of using music strategically within your podcast. I don't know if that's crazy, but I think
mm.
at the branded and the B2B level, not a lot of podcasts do that, or they a lot of times use like generic, like corporate music. But
Yeah,
I think if there's a budget to license popular music, or just other music that's a little bit different than what most people in their world are doing, I think that could be considered crazy almost in a way, and I think that would be really cool, but there's a lot of hesitation. Yeah.
yeah. It's corporates come from a lot of scars. But you're right. I think people these days use music in intro, outro, maybe sponsor plug. But what I've been thinking about as a crazy idea, say for this podcast is there an episode where I can play music throughout? It's low volume and we are speaking.
I love that.
How is that gonna be?
I've
But
seen that
again,
on Sorry to interrupt you, no, I've seen
it's
that
okay.
I've thought of that exact same thing, because 'cause I've seen it on YouTube where people are talking and they have, like, music, low level. I like that, and I've thought of that, as well. Yeah, I say that that could be cool. I don't know that everyone would care or appreciate it, but I think part of, like, what you're doing aside from, like, the messaging and the brand awareness or maybe the lead generation is, like, you're in a way, and, people may not agree with me on this, but
Mm.
you're kinda creating a piece of art too. Like, it should
Yes.
be,
Yes.
a little bit unique, and you should ultimately wanna have fun with it. I mean, I know at the corporate level, there's a lot of bureaucracy and levels of
Ah,
approval, but I think if people just opened up their eyes a little bit and, followed best practices in the industry, but just had a little bit more fun with it and a little bit more creativity, I don't know that that would generate more downloads or more leads or more brand awareness, but at least there's an element of fun to the project because I mean, it's marketing. I mean, look at the Super Bowls coming up. Look at all those commercials. All those companies are having fun with the commercials, and they're effective. And I think a little bit of that is lost, even with myself. Like even when
man.
I'm planning episodes, sometimes I'm like, this is way too like
Yes.
I gotta like have some more fun with this. Like just
Yeah.
because, and that's maybe just my personality too. Other people, if they want to be serious and they feel good about being serious, but I think it's something to think about, I think, and I think, yeah. Yeah,
You,
what do you
you
think?
know, it's it may not drive the volume,
Right.
but we are getting to a world where even corporate clients are asking for relevance. How can I improve my consumption rates? How can I get return listeners? How can I get, even though I can't track it directly, but how can I get a sale and somebody says, I found you through our podcast, which is going to be my last question, but I'll ask that after the break and some of these other things. So as the world moves, I think to relevance in content marketing in general, and now even with podcasting, then I think people will start to, get really creative because they need to not just compete for volume, they need to compete for relevance,
I
which
like
is
that. That's a good way to put it,
which
relevant.
is really, yeah, I think throughout this decade, once we hit that peak at the diffusion of innovation, then we'll now start to look at how can this be relevant. So, guys, if you're listening, you see how this is. A few of them are on script, but a lot are off the script. I did not plan that. I just wanted to go into the rabbit hole with Eric here. But guys, please, it's the Marketing Leadership Podcast. Subscribe to this podcast. Even if you don't subscribe, share. I probably will rank share better greater than anything else because if you share, somebody, another human being gets it, and that person might subscribe if they want to. So please, share, like, subscribe, review. Don't review 1 star, please. You can review anything. If you have a 1 star, let's talk. you know. But this is how we do it with great guests on this podcast. And I want you to really follow us so it really keeps us going as we continue to record a lot here. I have one more question for Eric, but I've got the dots rapid fire coming up. But we need to take a quick commercial break for our sponsor. And when we get back, it's going to be the dots rapid fire where we'll try to see how strong Eric is, in handling this fire. But we'll see how it goes. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. So, like I said, it's the dots rapid fire. It's going to be 3 questions. Eric says the truth and nothing but the truth. Are you ready, sir?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Right. Let's
I'm
do
a
it.
little nervous, but
Yeah,
okay.
I know. You'll be fine. Okay. The first question, of course, this is all marketing slash business themed. What is your favorite marketing metric?
You know, it varies across industries. For web, I would say views per month or users per month. For podcasting, I think consumption rate is a great metric.
Yeah, consultory it's getting a lot of attention these days, and we at Content Allies would say just try to get your episode as concise as possible. If it's very long, it's either is a B2C podcast where you are discussing like crime or dating. But if it's B2B, it needs to be very concise, within the 20-25 minutes drive time.
Mhm.
That is, there's usually a correlation there. Okay. Next question. How long do you use social media every day?
Oh man, I probably scroll more than I use it. I mean, I could look my iPhone screen time is high.
Hmm.
So too much. I would say too much. Definitely.
Too much.
Yeah.
But I mean, then
Probably,
you're probably connecting or something like that, connecting with people,
you
learning more about the space.
I would like to tell people that, but it's a lot more of just doom scrolling.
Do scroll. It's needed, man. Mental health is a thing. So please, by all means. Okay. Last question. What is your favorite marketing or business quote?
You know, There well, I'll give you 2. The generic answer is Nike, "Just do it," and
Hmm.
I think that holds a lot of weight because it's kinda true. It's like you just gotta figure out baby steps and slowly just do what you can, and then that'll compound and just do whatever your idea is, just do what you can step by step. But, there's a show I work on, and the host of the show, when we're in team meetings, he's always talking about doing things with excellence. He'll
Hmm.
say, "Eric, you edit the podcast with excellence," or, "We like to do XYZ with excellence." So I like that because I think a lot of times, and sorry if I'm gonna go off on a tangent, but I think
No,
a lot of
please.
times service providers and there's a lot of people who wanna start agencies or be service providers, or I see it in the podcast world a lot where, like, they wanna call themselves like a podcast producer or podcast, company, but I find, like, that a lot of these it's kind of like a buzzword to, like, wanna start a
One at a
service-based, like,
time.
agency, and a lot of these
Yeah.
people, I don't know if they do things with excellence. Like, I've been working in audio. I have a little chip on my shoulder, I guess, because I've been working with audio for, like, 15 years, and so
Yeah.
I really do pay attention to detail, but sometimes I'll hear these edits that people, like, get back to me, and they're just blatantly, they're not that good, but
Yeah.
then they have a website and they're branded as, like, providing this, like, audio editing service, but their edits aren't that good because they didn't edit it with excellence.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they wanna make the money or they like the allure of, like, branding themselves as, like, an engineer or, like, a podcast agency.
Fake it till you make it.
I think that's what it is, and that might be appropriate sometimes, but the truth will eventually it comes out.
Yeah, when we were speaking at the back before we started this, you were commenting on the production and things like that. And I've had people tell me, I've not told Karen of Discrete this that, why don't you just use Zoom? A lot of agencies use Zoom, and I don't want to mention any specific ones, but I well versed in the space and I know a lot of the providers there. And I'm like, well, for me, especially in the video side, this is a bit of the custom service, and it gets me to that level of excellence, if I were to use your words there, in my mind. And
Yeah.
if I pitch to people and I share on social media and they see all the nice things, they're like, oh yeah, okay, this should be a podcast. What's joining? I mean, I don't ask everyone what's your motivation for agreeing to do this, but I believe just doing things with world class standard is really, really, one of those things there. So you're right about that, and I think it's two things. First, just do it, just execute. But when you execute, also make sure to execute with excellence.
Yeah, no, 100%, and just to comment on that, yeah, I
Mm.
think too why I think just in the culture we are today with Instagram and Uber and Uber Eats and everything happens so fast and on demand that I think that people aren't willing to put in the time as much to hone their craft, or maybe it's part of the younger generation. I don't know. I'm 38, so maybe I have a little bit of that in me, but also I'm a little bit old school where it's like you have to hone your
Yeah,
craft if you want to start a
yeah,
marketing agency, a podcast if agency, whatever. If you want to be a mechanic, it takes a long time to really hone your craft, and I think people are. It seems like people are trying to cut corners and they want like the flashy instant gratification, and to me,
Unfortunately, it's gonna continue.
it's gonna get
I,
worse.
I I see it on LinkedIn. With all due respect, I try to be very mindful of sharing what I share. I don't have a course. All I do is promote Listen Network, which is a company I co-founded, and that's enough for me. But people do so much to get you to get a course, for example, or to get you to do something for them. And, they add value a little bit, but they don't add as much. There's just so much in there, and I would just say this, I am a man of faith. And in the Bible, we say, whatever you sow, you will reap. God cannot be mocked. The market cannot be mocked. Whatever you sow at the end of the day, you will reap. The world is moving to a place of, we're talking about the podcasting, what moving to a place of consumption rates, better engagement. Even from a business side, the world is moving to how well do your customers retain for? They retain when you just overwhelm them to death, basically. Go above and beyond, to deliver, again, back to Eric's word there, excellence. And over time, that shows. And speaking of something showing over time, branded podcast done well shows over time. And for me, I think there's data out there that shows that for some brands, podcast is contributing to their offline conversions, whatever that offline is, in-store sales or just pure SQL generation and so on and so forth. For the happy customers out there, I guess, and some of the unhappy ones, what have they told you in terms of how the podcast has really impacted their business from a conversion standpoint? And this conversion could be anything, which is why I'm just making it a little bit blanket.
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, I would say as a company, we focus a little bit less on that. Like, I like to think that we're more of a creative agency,
Mm.
where we put the creativity. We're storytellers at heart. Um, so I got to be honest. In my experience and with what we offer, I think a lot of those discussions and those metrics happen within the brands and businesses internally. Um, So I don't know that, at least for what we do, if a client's ever come back and been like, "Oh, because of the podcast, we've done X, Y, and Z, or we've converted X, Y, and Z." Um, so I don't that's a good question. We should probably be paying more attention to that, to be honest. But and we do dabble in some of that stuff, but it's mainly from, like, podcast metrics point of view, like, views, streams,
Yeah,
consumption rate,
yeah,
YouTube growth,
yeah,
that type of thing, not so much
yeah,
offline.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, storytelling is key. I think being able to tell the right storytelling is key. Yeah, of course, there's a bit of starting to think about that, but I must warn you, there is a huge rabbit hole in there. I specialize in podcast marketing. I want to be able to build myself. As Dots loves marketing on podcast marketing, because I think that podcasting is going to replace text as the next form of media, especially long form media. So, but
You
yeah,
think? Wow, that's yeah.
it's
It's I know we're going long here, but,
no, it's okay. It's still got time.
it's funny because my website views are like 100x what the podcast downloads are. Um, but yeah, I think I would love that. I would love, like, voice and audio, and I know there's already some, like, search stuff that you could do with voice, or, like, even
Exactly.
with articles, like, there's plugins to get, like, an AI voice to read, um, the article. Uh yeah, that's interesting because my website's starting to grow, and I'm like, "Damn, like, is this it's like traditional, like, written SEO going away?" I hope not, because I feel like I
Yeah,
finally got to a point where, like, I understand, like, how to do it, and it's
yeah.
starting to compound, but, well, yeah.
I mean,
Over to
if the industry pivots, you're already sitting at the right place. A lot of people will have to like, oh, what do I do? You know, so you already can pivot at the snap of a finger. So that's really, but yeah, that's what I think. I think it's going to happen. People will increasingly get busier. Maybe not with AI, but if that happens, then people just want to be able to enjoy content in a certain type of way. which is why people talk about video a lot these days. But it's slowly now moving to audio content all the time.
Yeah, because you want
So
less screen time probably. So if you want to consume whatever it is, if you can just be driving or vacuuming your house or something, and you could, yeah, it's funny, but uh, yeah, because well, on a side note, the
mm,
audio versus video debate, we'll have to see where that goes with podcasting. Because in a way, I'm
mhm.
like an audio purist. I do put my show on YouTube, but it I'm not one to sit and watch like a video long form or even medium form like video of like an interview. I'll play it in the background maybe, but then that's still audio. So there's a lot to happen with that coming up.
Most likely audio, because people want to do that and do something else. Except if AI makes our life so better and we are all living on government stipends, then we can all watch stuff all day if we need to. But I think people will stick to watching movies and listening to thought leadership content on YouTube, for example. So that makes a lot of sense there. This has been a very, very fun episode. And I will tell you exactly why, because people will say, oh, you're saying that because I'm a guest. But no, I have a different reason for everyone. And for yours is because we're able to really just go off the tangent and away from the script and really discuss some, like you said, good questions, which is really good for our listeners or viewers to think about as well. So thank you so much for sharing your perspective, your insights. It's really insightful. I learned a few things personally myself as well in these conversations, and this really awesome. So Eric, where can people find you if they want to up their podcasting game and content marketing game in general, I would say?
Yeah, you head on over to the podcasthaven.com. Everything's there, contact info, some of the services we provide, as well as the blog. I recommend you may have a question that's answered in one of our articles. We talk about podcast marketing, podcast
Mhm.
production. So the podcasthaven.com is where you can find all that. Um, and if you want to listen to our podcast, I'm the host. Like it's kind of our flagship show. It's called Clipped, Clipped, as in clipping audio
Mhm.
editing. And yeah, they're clippedpod.com is the website for that. That's clipped pod, or just type in clipped to any podcast player and it should come up.
Yeah, guys, please ensure to follow. That's all we have for you as well. And more episodes like this on my website, dotslovesmarketing.com. If you don't want the website, just go to your favorite podcast platform, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, search Marketing Leadership. I don't know if I'm going to change the name later, but we'll see how it goes as the focus of the podcast starts to change. I would like to thank Content Allies, Desk Creek, and Listen Network for their support. Till next time, connect the dots.
Thank you for listening to the Marketing Leadership Podcast, brought to you by Dots Loves Marketing. There will be links to any resources mentioned in today's show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode.